The news broke at exactly 7:42 a.m., just as the City of London was stirring to life. Literature student, 21, marries billionaire tycoon, 81. That was the headline plastered across every news site, gossip column, and social media feed within the hour. By midday, Evelyn Hart had become the most searched name in the UK, and not for any reason she had ever hoped for. Her university email inbox flooded with threats, accusations, memes. The Daily Mail ran a full-page feature with a photo of her from 2 years ago, taken without consent, captioned, "From classrooms to cash cows?" Her professors received anonymous complaints. Her peers, previously indifferent, now stared as though she were a creature from a Victorian scandal, unearthed and reborn in modern skin. None of it mattered. Because Evelyn Hart had expected this. Her silence was not confusion. It was strategy. The truth, she knew, would not protect her. Not now. Not yet. The wedding had been quiet, almost eerie in its lack of grandeur. Held in the private chapel of Alden Manor, nestled deep in the countryside of Devonshire, there were no photographers, no guests outside the required legal witnesses, and certainly no champagne toasts. Rupert Alden had worn a plain black suit, his posture straight despite the weight of his age. Evelyn, in a modest cream dress, had not smiled once. When asked, "Do you take this man?" she had looked into his pale blue eyes and said clearly yes. Not because she loved him, but because she had to know. Because there was a story beneath his silence, one that involved her mother, a missing past, and something she couldn't yet name. Back in London, the press spun theories faster than facts could catch up. Some claimed she was after his will, others that she had seduced him while working as a private assistant, a role she'd never held. One outlet ran a segment alleging she had faked her academic background to appear more sophisticated for a man of Rupert Alden's class. What none of them understood was that Evelyn had never chased class. She had spent her entire life resisting it. Born and raised in a modest 2-bedroom flat in Camden, Evelyn had grown up in the soft ruins of her mother Margaret's silence. Her mother never spoke about the past, not about her father, not about how she paid rent, not about why her hands trembled when certain names came on the news. She simply worked. Cleaned houses during the day, stitched upholstery at night, and raised Evelyn to read, think, and never beg for anything. It wasn't until Evelyn turned 21 that the past came knocking, in the form of a letter, sent by hand. The envelope was cream-colored, heavy with embossed initials, R.A. Inside, a note written in neat, careful cursive. Miss Hart. If you're reading this, then I imagine your mother has not told you the full story. I don't blame her. I am in the final years of a life I once thought would end with silence. But I no longer believe in quiet exits. I have something to offer you. A proposition, yes, but more than that, a truth. One that may change everything you thought you knew.
Comme tout Alden Manor. One meeting.
That is all I ask. Yours sincerely,
Rupert Alden.
At first, Evelyn thought it a prank.
Rupert Alden, the Rupert Alden?
Former hedge fund magnate, once dubbed the Ice King of Canary Wharf, a man who disappeared from the public eye 2 decades ago after being implicated in one of the most mysterious financial scandals in UK history? It couldn't be him. And even if it was, why her? She confronted her mother, who went pale at the sight of the letter.
Margaret Toritinalf before Evelyn could stop her.
You're not going, she had said, her voice trembling.
Do you understand me?
Whatever that man wants, whatever he says he has, he's poison. Evelyn had never seen fear in her mother's face before.
Not like that. Not desperation, fear.
That was what convinced her to go. And so, 3 days later, she found herself standing before the gates of Alden Manor, her heart pounding, the air around her thick with something unnameable. Rupert Alden greeted her himself. He looked older than in the articles, thinner, quieter, with eyes that seemed to hold both sharpness and surrender. He didn't offer tea. Didn't waste time. I'll be direct, he said. I would like you to marry me. Evelyn stared, thinking it was a joke. It's not a romantic proposal, he continued.
It's a contractual one.
1 year.
No obligation beyond présence.
In return, I will fund your mother's surgery, fully and immediately. And I will tell you the truth. About your mother. About you. She asked him why. He said, because I have lived too long carrying someone else's shame. And I won't die without setting it down. She said nothing for a long time. Then she agreed. Now, sitting alone in her student flat in London, Evelyn scrolled through the headlines.
Student prostitute hors stratégique genius.
Rupert Alden's gold-digging bride speaks. Oh wait, she doesn't.
A knock at the door.
A delivery. She opened it to find a single envelope, no return address. Inside, a printed photo. It was from the wedding. She and Rupert, standing side by side, unsmiling. But someone, some cruel hand, had drawn a noose around her neck in red ink. Below it scrawled,
Roinrich, Beach.
Evelyn folded the photo in half, placed it gently in a drawer, and locked it.
Not out of fear.
But because she knew. The real story was just beginning. The night Evelyn returned to Alden Manor after the wedding, the silence of the estate was different. It was no longer the hollow, expectant quiet of a place waiting to be filled, but the resolute stillness of something sealed, like the closing of a vault. Rupert was waiting in the study, seated in a high-backed leather chair that seemed to swallow him whole. A fire crackled in the hearth, throwing shadows along the oak-paneled walls. She entered without a word and sat across from him. No champagne, she said, her tone dry. I don't celebrate arrangements, he replied. There was a pause, not awkward but heavy. Between them stretched a silence stitched not with absence, but with intention. You said you'd tell me the truth, Evelyn said. Rupert nodded once and reached into the drawer beside him. He placed a box on the table, a simple wooden case, weathered but intact. She opened it. Inside lay a stack of letters, bound with a red ribbon, and on top, a single photograph, a young woman laughing beside a much younger Rupert Alden. The woman was unmistakably her mother. Evelyn held the photo in her hand. Her mother couldn't have been older than 25, radiant and free in a way Evelyn had never seen. You knew her, Evelyn said quietly. I loved her, Rupert replied. He leaned back, folding his hands. 30 years ago, I was a man ascending too fast. I made enemies in Parliament, in the markets, and in the press. Your mother, Margaret, was the one person who made it all tolerable. She was the reason I stopped seeing power as the endgame. I thought we would have a life, perhaps not conventional but real. So what happened? They came for me, he said. Not with guns or handcuffs, but with whispers. Rumors. One of my business rivals, Daniel Whitmore, yes, the man your mother eventually married, accused me of orchestrating a market manipulation scheme. The case was baseless, but the media latched on. I was vilified. Evelyn frowned. She'd heard fragments of the story before, how Alden's career collapsed in a scandal that was never fully proven. And my mother? She asked. She was pressured, Rupert said, his voice low. By Daniel. By her family. They said if she didn't publicly denounce me, her father would lose his military pension. Her younger brother was up for a government position. They told her I was doomed, and staying by my side would drag everyone else down.
She left you.
She vanished. Overnight. No goodbye. No warning. He stared into the fire.
Ils sont letters.
Dozens. I begged her to at least let me explain. She never replied. Evelyn opened the box again. The letters inside bore her mother's name in Rupert's handwriting, neatly, reverently, the ink slightly faded with time. I never stopped writing, he said. Even when I stopped sending. Evelyn felt the heat rise behind her eyes, but blinked it away. Emotion now was a liability. You said something about me, she said. That knowing the truth would change how I saw myself.
Et hésitait-elle.
Evelyn, he said slowly, I don't have a certificate. I don't have a DNA test. But I know. I always knew. Knew what?
You are my doctor.
The words didn't fall like a bomb. They slipped in quietly, like water through a crack in the wall. But the effect was the same, sudden disorientation, a shift in the foundation of everything. She didn't speak. Her brain processed each syllable individually, as if they were foreign. No, she finally said.
My father was Daniel Whitmore.
Your legal father, yes. But not your biological one. He watched her carefully. Margaret was pregnant when she left. She would have been only a few weeks. She didn't tell me. I didn't find out until I saw a newspaper article, years later, of Daniel and your mother walking with a little girl. You were about 6.
The timing, the ressemblance.
I knew.
Evelyn stood.
She couldn't sit anymore. And you waited until now? I respected her choice. She didn't want me in your life. But I never stopped following you. Quietly. Discreetly. Donations to your school. A silent hand ensuring your mother's medical bills never drowned her. I told myself that was enough. She stared at him, trembling. You should have said something. I thought I had time.
Silence again.
But this time, it wasn't shared. Evelyn's thoughts raced, memories shifting shape, timelines warping. Her childhood, her mother's silence, Daniel's coldness, the hollow explanations. It made sense.
Tout much sense.
What do you want from me? She asked.
Nothing, Rupert said.
Except, to pass this truth to you before I go. I'm not asking for forgiveness or a role. I just wanted you to know. Evelyn sat again, this time slower. Her breath was shallow. Why the marriage? She said. Why not just tell me? Because you wouldn't have come, he said simply. Not if I were just a stranger with a story and no proof. But a proposition, with conditions and consequences, that got your attention, didn't it? She had no answer. Your mother's condition is worsening, he added. I've already transferred the funds. The surgery is scheduled for next week. Evelyn looked up, startled. You already did it? I didn't need your consent. I only needed your time. They sat in the study until the fire dwindled to embers. Later, alone in the guest room that was now her bedroom, Evelyn stared at the ceiling, her mind refusing to quiet. She wasn't sure what she felt. Betrayed? Relieved? Confused? All of it, probably. She reached under her pillow and pulled out her journal. On the first page, she wrote, Day 1 of the arrangement.
Today I marry a man I don't love to incover a truth I might not survive.
He says he's my father. And I think I believe him. Alden Manor was a place where time forgot how to move. Its stone corridors echoed even the lightest footstep. The wallpaper in some rooms had begun to peel at the edges, and the scent of aged wood and long-extinguished fires clung to the air. It wasn't decrepit, no, Rupert Alden was far too meticulous for neglect. But it was old in the way that people are old when they've lost something they never recovered from. Evelyn wandered the house in the early days after their wedding, trying to make sense of her new surroundings. It didn't feel like a home, or even a house. It felt like a story half-finished, suspended in waiting. Each room held echoes of someone no longer there. In some, the furniture had been covered with dust cloths. In others, the curtains remained drawn, as if daylight had been banished by grief. She began to notice small things, deliberate, curated details. In the drawing room, there was a framed photo of a young woman standing in front of the Thames, her eyes squinting in laughter. Evelyn recognized the woman immediately. Her mother, Margaret. The same photograph that had once sat in their tiny flat in Camden, except this version was clearer, better preserved. There was also a strand of her mother's handwriting on a folded recipe card, pinned on a corkboard in the kitchen, add extra nutmeg. Rupert likes it sweeter. The sight of her mother's name written so casually, so intimately, shook her more than she wanted to admit. She didn't ask Rupert about these things. Not yet. They shared meals at the long dining table, often in silence. He was not cold to her, just reserved. Measured. He asked about her studies, her thesis on post-war British literature, and occasionally referenced texts she'd barely begun to understand. There was a sharpness to him, even now. Age had bowed his shoulders and slowed his walk, but not dulled his mind.
One evening, Evelyn broke the silence.
What was she like? She asked, not looking up from her plate.
Rupert glanced at her.
He knew she meant Margaret. She was clever, he said.
Not juste intelligent, clever.
She could read a room like a novel. She knew when people lied to themselves, even if they didn't. Evelyn allowed herself a small smile. That sounded like her mother. And she was braver than she believed, he added quietly. Until she wasn't. They fell into silence again. The following day, Evelyn explored the West Wing, locked for years, according to the housekeeper. Rupert had given her permission to go anywhere. She used the brass key he left in a dish by the study. The West Wing had a different character. It was warmer, somehow. Lived in. There was a sitting room with floral wallpaper, a fireplace lined with ceramic animals, and a desk still holding a half-filled notebook. A wardrobe held a faded dressing gown that smelled faintly of lavender. Evelyn ran her fingers along the spine of a book left open on the bedstand, Persuasion by Jane Austen. In the corner of the room was a child's drawing in a frame. A crayon sketch of a house with smoke curling from the chimney.
Tout stick figure holding gant.
One had glasses. The other wore a dress. Evelyn felt a slow, expanding pressure in her chest. She turned to leave and noticed something tucked beneath the mirror on the vanity table. A letter. Addressed to no one. She opened it with trembling hands. I keep dreaming about her.
In the dream, I never lost her.
Sometimes she's 5 years old.
Sometimes she's 16.
Sometimes she's walking through the halls of this house and doesn't know me, and that's the one that breaks me. I've built a life out of shadows because I was told I didn't deserve the light. But she is the light. Even if she never knows my name. Evelyn folded the letter slowly, pressing the creases flat with her thumb. She wasn't sure if the letter was meant for her mother, or for her. Maybe it was both. Later that night, Rupert was in the study again, this time seated with a chessboard. One side was fully set. The other waited for her. I don't know how to play, Evelyn said from the doorway. You'll learn, he replied, not looking up. She sat opposite him. He moved his pawn forward.
She copiait émotion.
You knew I was your daughter, she said, not as a question. Yes. But you never reached out. Not directly. He nodded. I thought I would destroy what little piece she had left. And perhaps I was afraid. That you'd hate me. That she'd taught you to. Evelyn studied the board.
Black and white.
Ordered chaos. She never taught me to hate, she said. She taught me not to ask questions. That's worse, Rupert said, with a rare edge in his voice. Because it means you learned to stay silent. They played in silence for the next few moves. She wasn't good, made obvious mistakes, but he never commented. Do you think she hated you? She asked eventually. No, he said. I think she hated herself for what she did. And hating me was easier than facing that. The room was dim except for the lamplight and the soft ticking of an antique clock. Why me? Evelyn asked.
Why did you want me here?
Rupert looked at her for a long time before answering. Because the world will remember me for what I was accused of. And I don't have the years left to change that. But I wanted someone, just one person, to know the real version. Not the sanitized one. Not the legal one.
The truth.
She stared at him. Evelyn looked at the board. She moved her knight, poorly.
Rupert capture it without hesitation.
You'll get better, he said, almost kindly. Later, alone in her room, Evelyn opened her journal. Day 4 of the arrangement. This house is filled with echoes of someone I barely know and someone I might become.
I am the doctor of August.
But he's not dead. Not yet. The first real explosion came on a Monday morning, 1 week after the wedding. Evelyn had returned to London briefly to collect a few of her belongings from her university dormitory. She kept her head down, wore a grey hoodie, and avoided the main entrance, slipping in through the side gate behind the library. But it didn't matter. A student with a phone spotted her in the corridor and posted a photo within minutes. That image, a blurry, unflattering shot of Evelyn holding a laundry bag, was instantly plastered across social media with captions like "Gold digger goes grocery shopping," and "She's back for the kill." She tried to ignore it. She told herself it would pass. But within hours, something more dangerous than mockery surfaced. The tabloid headline hit at noon, exclusive, the secret prenup that could make Evelyn Hart Britain's youngest billionaire widow. The article claimed that an anonymous source close to the Alden estate had leaked a private agreement between Evelyn and Rupert. According to the document, conveniently redacted in the published photos, Evelyn stood to inherit the entire Alden fortune upon Rupert's death, with no stipulations. The piece also alleged she had visited a solicitor in Mayfair just 2 days after the wedding to begin processing the transfer of certain assets. It was sensational, calculated, and entirely false. She felt the ground shift beneath her. Calls flooded her mobile within minutes, unknown numbers, press inquiries, aggressive demands for comment. She turned the phone off. When she logged into her university email, she found a notice from the administration, you are to attend a disciplinary hearing regarding conduct unbecoming of a student of this institution. No details.
Just a date and time.
By evening, #EvyTheAir trended on Twitter. Someone unearthed an old poem she'd submitted for a creative writing class. A line from it, "Gold doesn't rot if you polish it with charm," was taken wildly out of context and turned into an anthem for her alleged greed. Memes were everywhere. Her face photoshopped onto piles of cash, onto movie posters, even onto the body of Marie Antoinette. What terrified her most wasn't the mockery. It was how quickly people believed it. The next morning, she returned to Alden Manor pale and shaken. Rupert greeted her at the front entrance, already holding a manila envelope. "I saw it," he said. Evelyn's voice was hoarse. "It's not true." "I know," Rupert said. "They've been waiting to do this for years. You just gave them a new weapon." She opened the envelope. Inside was a clean notarized document, his actual will, dated before the wedding. "You're not in it," he said simply. "No amendments were made. No trusts. No assets changed hands. I wanted to be sure you had no legal ties they could twist." Evelyn stared at the document, then at him. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because it wouldn't have stopped them."
The truth never travait la face à Ali.
He led her into the study and poured her a cup of tea. She sat, gripping the cup too tightly. "I went to get my books," she said. "I didn't even speak to anyone. Someone took my photo. Then this." Rupert leaned back in his chair. "They're not after you, Evelyn. They're after me. Always have been."
Your collatéral damage. Allons pause.
Then she said, "They want me to crack. They want me to fit the story they've written." He gave a slow nod. "That's the modern execution," he said. "Not with rope. With narrative." A few days later, a physical letter arrived.
No return address.
Inside was a single sheet of paper with cut-out letters glued to it. "We know what you're doing. He'll be dead soon. You'll pay." Evelyn folded it carefully and handed it to Rupert. He didn't even blink. He simply placed it in a drawer beside his desk. "They're bluffing," he said. "But what if they're not?" she asked. Rupert hesitated, then said something he hadn't said before. "There's more to this than the press," he said. "This isn't just about scandal. Someone is making sure that if the truth ever resurfaces, it drowns first."
What truth?
He looked at her evenly. "The truth about what happened in 1993. She froze. "The financial case?" He nodded. "The one that ruined me. The one Daniel Whitmore helped orchestrate." She stared at him. "You think he's behind this?" "I don't think. I know." Rupert stood and walked to a cabinet in the corner of the room. He pulled out a leather folder and handed it to her. Inside were photocopies, old court transcripts, newspaper clippings, internal memos. Many of the pages were marked with yellow notes in the margins. "They sealed the case after 2 months," he said.
No conviction.
No apology.
Just silence.
"But if you look closely, look at the signatures on these forms, the inconsistencies, it's clear. I was forced to sign a false confession." "Why?" "Because I was a threat. Because I refused to play a game they built. And Daniel was very good at playing it." Evelyn's fingers trembled as she flipped through the documents. "If this came out, it would destroy him," Rupert finished. "But I never had the strength to do it. Or the allies." Evelyn looked up.
You do now.
That night, she wrote in her journal. Day 8. "I thought the hardest part would be enduring the silence. It's not. It's knowing that somewhere out there, someone is shaping a version of my life they want the world to believe, and they're winning. But maybe not for long." Evelyn stood outside the small Camden flat where she had grown up, her hand resting on the door as though it might push her away instead of open. She hadn't returned in nearly 2 weeks. Not since the wedding. Not since everything changed. Her mother answered on the second knock. Margaret looked older, noticeably so. Her face was drawn, and her eyes, usually so carefully controlled, gave away something deeper.
Fear, maybe.
Or guilt. "You shouldn't be here," Margaret said. "I didn't come to argue," Evelyn replied. Her mother stepped aside, and Evelyn entered the place that had once been her entire world. The living room was unchanged. The same beige sofa. The old lamp that flickered on and off. The silence between them, however, had grown heavier, like a wall neither had the tools to break down. Margaret sat down but didn't invite Evelyn to join her. "I saw the news," she said. "They've gone mad. I'm sorry." Evelyn stood in the center of the room. "You knew this would happen, didn't you? That's why you didn't want me to go to him." Margaret didn't answer.
Evelyne presse donc.
"He says you were pregnant when you left him. That you never told him. That you let Daniel raise me as his own." Margaret flinched but said nothing.
Ici trop.
Evelyn asked, more softly this time.
Silence.
"I need to know," she said.
Note for the press. Note for the money.
For me. Finally, Margaret looked up, and Evelyn saw something crack. Not a weakness, but a release. A dam giving way after years of holding back.
Yes, Margaret whispered.
"It's true."
Evelyn sat, her legs suddenly too weak to hold her.
"You never told me," she said. "I couldn't." "Why?" Margaret stared at the wall, her voice low and steady. "Because I was a coward."
Evelyn waited.
She could feel something shifting in the room, the air thick with things long buried. "I loved him," Margaret said.
Rupert.
"I loved him more than anyone. But love doesn't always survive fear. I was 25, and he was a rising star in a world I barely understood. Powerful men hated him. He refused to bend to them, and they decided to punish him." She paused. "When the scandal broke, they didn't just threaten him. They threatened me. My family. They said if I didn't cut ties with him, my father would lose his pension. My brother wouldn't get his job in the civil service. They would come for me next." Evelyn's voice was quiet.
"So you left."
"I left," Margaret said. "Without telling him I was pregnant. Without answering his letters. I married Daniel because I thought he could protect me. But I was wrong." Evelyn frowned. "He was the one behind it, wasn't he?" Margaret nodded. "Daniel orchestrated the entire scandal. He leaked false documents, paid off journalists, manipulated the press. He wanted Rupert gone, and he got what he wanted. And then he got me."
Evelyn stood again.
She walked to the window, trying to breathe. The truth didn't feel liberating. It felt suffocating. "He was never kind to you," Evelyn said. "No," Margaret agreed. "But he was powerful. And after what I did, I thought I deserved the coldness." Evelyn turned to her. "You let me grow up thinking I was his daughter. You let him treat you like you owed him something." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I thought I could protect you from it. From the truth.
From the danger."
"But you didn't," Evelyn said. "You just handed me over to the very man who ruined everything." There was no anger in her tone, only quiet devastation. Margaret covered her face with her hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered. A long silence followed. Then Evelyn said, "You have to speak out." Margaret looked up, startled.
"No."
"Yes," Evelyn said firmly.
"You're the only one who can't say it all together."
"You know what Daniel did. You know what he's capable of. If we want to reopen the case, we need your testimony."
Margaret shook her head. Elle rue un mot.
"He already has." Evelyn walked to her mother and knelt beside her. "You're not just his victim.
You're mine, too. He deserves the truth."
"Rupert deserves it. And you deserve to stop being afraid."
Margaret's lips trembled.
"I can't do it publicly," she said. "Then do it your way," Evelyn said. "On your terms. But don't stay silent." 2 days later, Margaret sat in front of a camera in her living room. Evelyn and a legal observer were the only others present. The video was quiet, personal. Not polished. But honest. Margaret began by stating her name. Then she said the words Evelyn had never thought she'd hear.
"I'm Margaret Hart.
And I'm here to tell you the truth." She spoke for 20 minutes. She described her relationship with Rupert, the scandal, the manipulation, the threats. She named Daniel Whitmore directly. She acknowledged Evelyn's true parentage. She admitted her own silence. I've carried this for 30 years, she said. And I'm tired of pretending. I should have spoken sooner.
I should have trusted myself.
And I should have trusted my daughter. The video ended without drama. No music. No calls to action.
Just a woman telling the truth.
They uploaded it anonymously. It went viral in less than a day. The public reaction was divided. Some praised Margaret for her bravery. Others accused her of lying to cover her daughter's tracks.
Journaliste demandait d'interview.
Evelyn declined them all. But something had changed. For the first time, the narrative was no longer controlled by the tabloids. It belonged, however briefly, to them. Back at Alden Manor, Rupert watched the video from his study. When it ended, he turned to Evelyn. She was braver than I remembered, he said. Evelyn didn't answer. Her throat was tight with emotion. She still loves you, she finally said. I never doubted that, Rupert replied. Only whether she could forgive herself.
Evelyn stared at the fire.
And now. She's beginning to. That night, Evelyn opened her journal. Day 12. Today my mother told the truth. It didn't fix everything. But for the first time in my life, I think I know who she really is. The morning after the video's release, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table in Alden Manor with a stack of folders and a half-drunk cup of coffee, watching rain blur the view through the wide stone-framed windows. The air in the manor was different now, charged with something alive. Possibility. Danger. Movement. Rupert entered slowly, leaning on his cane more than usual. He glanced at the files, then at her. You're ready, he said. I don't know if I'm ready, Evelyn replied, but I'm done being quiet. He nodded once.
T'étais neuf.
They had discussed the plan over the previous days, in cautious fragments. Now it was no longer a plan. It was a case. Evelyn's first move was to reach out to a solicitor she'd followed from afar, Amara Lewis, a human rights barrister known for taking on impossible causes. Amara had built her reputation on exposing political corruption and overturning wrongful convictions. She had also taken down 2 tabloid outlets with 1 libel case. Evelyn admired her for more than her legal skills. She admired her for surviving the system without letting it corrode her. She sent Amara an encrypted message with a single line, I believe you know the name Rupert Alden. I have the real story.
Can we talk?
Amara replied within an hour. They met at a discreet cafe tucked behind a bookshop in South Kensington. Amara was younger than Evelyn expected, dressed simply, without pretense. She listened carefully, eyes sharp, nodding occasionally but saying little. When Evelyn finished laying out what she knew, the documents, the sealed court files, her mother's testimony, the letter from Daniel Whitmore threatening her indirectly through press leaks, Amara leaned back in her chair and folded her arms. This isn't a small claim, she said. It's a war. And if we go to battle, people will get hurt. I know, Evelyn said. And your name will be tied to this forever. It already is. Amara studied her for a moment longer, then said, All right.
Let's begin.
Over the next few weeks, the manor became something else entirely. No longer just a museum of memories, it was a legal war room. Amara set up a mobile office in the West Wing. Evelyn worked around the clock, indexing documents, cross-referencing timelines, reaching out to journalists who had been silenced in the past. They found witnesses, 2 former employees from Rupert's firm, one of whom remembered seeing Daniel Whitmore in the building the night the fraudulent paperwork had supposedly been signed. There were phone records, obscure transactions, and a key piece of evidence, a whistleblower memo that had never been published, buried in an archive and retrieved only because Amara knew where to look. The memo described internal pressure placed on Alden to sign off on a deal he never initiated, an attempt to pin losses on him during a volatile period of market restructuring. The signatures on the documents were close matches, but Rupert's legal team believed they had been forged or, at the very least, manipulated. The most damning piece came from a man named Lawrence Peck, a former paralegal who had fled the financial sector 2 decades ago. He'd worked in the offices of Whitmore and Crane during the time of the scandal. When Amara located him, living off-grid in northern Wales, he agreed to meet. They gathered in a conference room in Bristol, Amara at the head of the table, Evelyn beside her, Rupert watching via video link from the manor. I'm not proud of what I did, Lawrence said. But I was 24 and scared out of my mind. Daniel told us what to file, what to shred, what to sign. He pulled a folder from his bag and laid it on the table. These are the copies I made. For insurance. I thought, maybe one day someone would come looking. Inside were documents never seen in court, memos showing coordinated messaging between Daniel's office and a number of media outlets. There were emails suggesting payments to journalists. One even included a list of questions not to ask Rupert during the press interviews he never agreed to. This, Samara said, her voice calm but cold, is how they bury the truth. The next step was procedural. They filed a motion to reopen the 1993 case, citing new evidence and the possibility of systemic obstruction of justice. It was met with resistance, as expected. The Crown Prosecution Service demanded more. Amara gave them everything. She made them see what had been ignored, dismissed, or erased. The case was approved for preliminary review. It wasn't victory, but it was entry. The door, for the first time in 30 years, was no longer locked. Meanwhile, Evelyn's public image began to shift. Slowly.
Note latence.
But something in the tone changed. The memes stopped. The articles grew quieter. A few bloggers who had once mocked her now retracted their posts. Journalists started reaching out, not for scandal, but for clarity. One email stood out, from a former editor at the Times, who admitted to killing a story about Rupert Alden under pressure from high places. I remember the day the memo came through, the editor wrote. It wasn't just censorship. It was command. That's when I knew the truth wasn't welcome. Evelyn didn't respond. But she saved the email. One night, as she worked late in the library at Alden Manor, Rupert joined her. He looked tired, but less burdened. You're different, he said.
So are you.
He sat beside her and looked over the files. I used to think I would die with this story sealed away. That history would swallow me whole. But you refused to let them write the ending. Evelyn closed the folder in front of her. We haven't won yet. No, he agreed. But we've made them afraid. That night, in her journal, Evelyn wrote,
Day 21.
Today, the law turned its head toward us. It didn't bow. It didn't speak. But it looked. And that's more than it's done in 30 years.
Dit Sissa au Reconning Begin.
The courtroom was smaller than Evelyn expected. Not grand and echoing, as it appeared in television dramas, but clean, austere, and tightly packed with energy that felt both electric and fragile. Every seat in the public gallery was filled. Journalists, law students, former employees, curious citizens, all watching, all waiting. This was the preliminary hearing to determine whether the case of the Crown versus Rupert Alden, 1993, would be formally reopened. It wasn't a full trial, not yet. But it was the first time in 3 decades that Rupert Alden's name would be uttered in court not as a ghost, but as a man demanding his record be set straight. Evelyn sat beside Amara Lewis at the front. Rupert was present via video link. Fragile health prevented him from traveling to London. His image hovered above them on a large screen mounted to the wall. He wore a dark blazer and a grey scarf. His posture was stiff, composed. His eyes, however, were alive with something Evelyn had never seen before, defiance. The Crown's legal representative, a middle-aged man with a polished accent and clipped tone, began the hearing by downplaying the relevance of the new evidence. Unverified documents, he called them. Personal testimonies from individuals with questionable motivations. He emphasized the time elapsed since the original proceedings and suggested that reopening the case would set a dangerous precedent. Amara rose when it was her turn. Her voice was calm, firm, and free of theatricality. This is not about revisiting old wounds. It's about correcting a documented miscarriage of justice. New evidence has emerged that not only contradicts the basis of Mr. Alden's implied guilt but also implicates a current public figure, Daniel Whitmore, in deliberate misconduct, manipulation of media, and obstruction of due process. She motioned to Evelyn. We also have a living witness to this manipulation. Someone who, for most of her life, was kept in the dark about her own origins, used as a pawn in a much larger narrative of control and silence. The judge, a woman in her early 60s with sharp features and an expression that revealed nothing, nodded.
Call your witness. Evelyn stood.
Her heart pounded, but her face remained still. She stepped into the witness box and took the oath. State your name, the clerk instructed.
Evelyn Margaret Hart.
And your relation to the petitioner? I am his wife, she said. The courtroom stirred. She paused. And I am also his daughter. There was a moment of silence, not scripted, not dramatic, but heavy with breath being held. She looked directly at the judge, then at the gallery. For most of my life, I believed my father was Daniel Whitmore, the man my mother married shortly after I was born. I now know that's untrue.
Rupert Alden is my biological father.
And for reasons I understand better now, my mother kept that secret. Because the man who destroyed Rupert's career was the same man she married to survive. She recounted the timeline, her discovery of the letters, the quiet life Rupert had lived after the scandal, the pressure her mother had faced to sever ties. She spoke of her mother's testimony, of the threats and smear campaigns, of the forged documents they had uncovered. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. But her voice did not waver once. I married Rupert to understand what had happened.
To know the truth.
And what I found was not a fraud or a manipulator. I found a man who carried shame he did not earn. Who loved a woman who could not afford to love him back. Who accepted exile so the people he loved could survive. When she stepped down, the courtroom was quiet. Then Amara called their next witness, Lawrence Peck. He detailed his work as a paralegal under Daniel Whitmore's firm in the early 90s. He explained how he'd witnessed the fabrication of documents, how memos were backdated, and how a small group within the firm coordinated press narratives that would drown Rupert Alden's reputation before any legal challenge could gain ground. He held up original copies. Internal communications that had never been disclosed in the original proceedings. Amara then presented the whistleblower memo. The court examined inconsistencies in the signatures. Experts provided statements confirming that several documents had, in their opinion, been altered after signing. Nothing definitive yet, but enough to sow doubt. Enough to raise serious questions. The final piece was a statement recorded privately by Margaret Hart, played aloud in the courtroom. Her voice cracked but remained clear. I should have spoken 30 years ago. I didn't. And that silence has cost more than I'll ever be able to repay. When the playback ended, even the Crown's solicitor remained quiet for a beat longer than necessary. The judge called for recess. Outside the courtroom, Evelyn leaned against the marble wall, her body finally sagging from the weight she had been carrying since the day she received Rupert's letter. Amara joined her. You did well. I'm exhausted. That's how it should feel. Inside, Rupert's video feed was turned off. Evelyn had wanted him to be there in person, but his health had declined in recent weeks. Still, he had watched every word, every document, every moment of tension. When the judge returned to deliver her decision, the entire room sat straighter. The court finds sufficient cause to order the reopening of the 1993 case of the Crown versus Rupert Alden on the basis of newly submitted evidence, credible witness testimony, and documented irregularities in the original proceedings. A formal inquiry will proceed under the jurisdiction of the High Court. There was no applause. No outburst. But Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest. It was not justice yet. But it was light. After decades of darkness. She called Rupert that evening from the Manor Library. You watched. I did, he said. And
You were magnifique.
She smiled for the first time that day. They believed you, he said. I think they believed the evidence. He was quiet for a moment. Then said, it's the same thing now. You're part of the evidence. That night, Evelyn sat by the window, journal in hand.
Day 27.
Today, the world turned its head. For the first time, it didn't look away. It listened. It listened to me. The day after the judge ordered the case reopened, Evelyn woke to find the manor cloaked in a deeper silence than usual. Not the stillness of sleep, but something heavier. She walked the hallways slowly, sensing something had shifted, like the house itself was holding its breath. When she reached Rupert's study, the door was ajar. Light spilled from the crack, a golden sliver slicing into the dim hallway. She knocked gently, but there was no reply. She pushed the door open. Rupert was in his chair, facing the fireplace, a tartan blanket draped over his legs. He looked peaceful, his hands resting in his lap, his eyes closed. At first, Evelyn thought he was asleep. But she knew. She stood for a moment, letting the stillness settle over her. Then she stepped forward, gently touched his wrist. Cold. In his lap was a journal leather-bound, with a ribbon marker peeking out from the middle. A pen had slipped between the pages and the armrest. On the side table sat a photograph, her mother in her 20s, smiling, holding a newborn Evelyn. The frame had been polished recently. She picked up the journal and opened to the page he had last written on. There was only one sentence, unfinished. Truth needs no applause. The pen stroke trailed off. Evelyn sat beside him.
No tears cam, not at first.
Only quiet. Later that morning, Amara arrived to review documents for the upcoming legal proceedings. Evelyn met her at the door and said simply, "He's gone." Amara stepped inside without a word, placing her briefcase on the hallway table. They sat in the kitchen, the morning sun catching on the old copper pans above the stove. Evelyn sipped tea but didn't taste it. "He saw the door open," she said. "That was enough for him." Amara nodded. "Some people wait for justice. Others just wait for a chance that someone might seek it." The funeral was quiet, as Rupert had requested. No media. No photographs. Just a few people who had known him before the fall. Former employees.
À Gardner from the Devonshire estate.
An old chess partner. Margaret came, in a black coat, holding Evelyn's arm the entire time. They buried him beneath an old oak tree on the manor grounds, just beyond the western garden. The headstone was simple.
Rupert Alden. 1942-2025.
He told the truth, even when no one listened. After the service, Margaret stood in front of the grave for a long time. She didn't cry, not then. But her hand remained on the stone as if trying to press something back into time. Evelyn watched from a few paces away. She didn't interrupt. Some grief was private, even between those who shared its weight. That evening, Evelyn returned to the study. It smelled of wood polish and old paper. His things were untouched. On the desk sat a manuscript, Rupert's memoir. Typed, printed, bound in a plain blue folder. The title page read,
The Kiefazer.
A memoir by Rupert Alden. Below it, in his own handwriting, for E. So you'd know before the world did. She turned the pages slowly. The voice was unmistakably his, measured, dry, deeply reflective. He wrote of his youth, his rise in the financial world, his love for Margaret, the betrayal, the scandal.
Every page pulsed with restraint and sorrow.
And every chapter carried her name in some hidden way.
Chérie d'un-til morning, the page blurring through sleepless eyes.
3 days later, Evelyn met with the legal team to finalize their submission to the High Court. Rupert's death did not end the case. In fact, it strengthened it. Posthumous evidence, now supported by public testimony, legal documentation, and whistleblower records, demanded a formal reckoning. Amara spoke to the press briefly. Not to sensationalize, but to clarify. There is no victory in vindication after death, she said. But there is dignity. And dignity has been denied long enough. The news of Rupert's passing spread quickly. And something unexpected happened. The narrative changed. Obituaries appeared not as scandal summaries, but as re-evaluations. Headlines read,
Rupert Alden, the man who spoke last and spoke true.
The quiet billionaire and the daughter who fought back. People began sharing clips from Evelyn's court testimony. An excerpt from Margaret's video went viral. A journalist from The Guardian published a long-form piece tracing the 30-year arc of silence, betrayal, and justice deferred. For the first time, the media did not distort her story, they amplified it. Evelyn received letters from strangers. A young woman who had left a controlling relationship. A retired banker who admitted to believing the lies about Rupert and regretting it. A student suspended for speaking out against their university administration. They all said the same thing, in different words, "Thank you for telling the truth." Back at the manor, Evelyn walked the gardens often. She spoke to the tree under which her father lay. Not every day, but when it mattered. One morning, she brought his memoir to the tree and sat at its base. She opened it to the final page. There, in neat handwriting, was a note written on a loose sheet of paper she hadn't seen before. Evie, you asked me why I waited so long to tell you the truth. Because I wanted you to hear it when you were strong enough not to run from it. You didn't run. That's how I knew I had done at least one thing right. Love always. Your father. Evelyn folded the note and placed it inside her journal.
She sat in silence, the breeze running soft finge through the grass. The world was loud now.
Her name no longer whispered in mockery, but spoken in debate, in reflection, in admiration. Yet in the core of it all, Evelyn remained still. Grounded. Not by victory, but by understanding.
She walked back to the manor slowly.
When she reached the front door, she turned once more to the oak tree. "Rest well," she whispered. "They're listening now." That night, she wrote in her journal.
Det irtitu. Today I buried my father.
But I did not bury his voice.
Det, il cari.
Spring returned to Devonshire with a quiet elegance. The fields beyond Alden Manor were streaked with fresh green, and the ivy that curled along the estate's stone walls had begun to bloom again. Evelyn stood in the garden where her father had been laid to rest, the wind tugging gently at her coat. It had been nearly a month since the funeral, but time felt strange now, both fast and still. Rupert's case was now officially reopened by the High Court, moving into a full review. Amara and her team had grown in number, now joined by journalists, legal researchers, and 2 financial ethics investigators. Evelyn remained at the center of it all, not as a symbol, but as a working force. She read case files by night, reviewed legal statements in the morning, and spent her afternoons organizing the documents her father had left behind. But legacy, she had learned, was more than correcting the past. It was choosing what came next. Rupert's will, unsealed 3 weeks after his death, stunned nearly everyone, except Evelyn. He had left no money to her personally.
Not a single pound.
Instead, he had established 3 things. First, a public trust, the Alden Foundation, dedicated to offering legal and psychological aid to women in financial and emotional crisis. The estate's assets would be gradually liquidated to fund it. Second, a complete donation of his private papers, case records, and personal correspondence to a newly created archive, housed in a wing of the University of London. It would be known as the Quiet Truth Project.
Third, a single clause concerning Evelyn Hart.
To Evelyn, who gave voice to a life I had long surrendered, the clause read, "I leave the story. Not to control it, but to tell it freely." That story was The Quiet Father, his memoir, completed in his final weeks. Evelyn read it twice more before deciding what to do. She contacted a small independent publisher known for its ethical approach to memoirs. No scandal. No sensationalism.
Just storytelling.
The publishing house agreed on one condition: Evelyn would write the foreword herself. She did. And she did not hold back. In it, she described the cost of silence. The weight of inherited shame. The damage caused not by lies alone, but by the people who benefit from them. She named Daniel Whitmore. She named the journalists who sold falsehoods for profit. But she also named those who helped: Amara, Margaret, Lawrence Peck. She ended the foreword with a single sentence. He did not die a fraud. He died a father. The book released quietly at first.
A modeste printing.
A few reviews in literary blogs. But it spread, steadily, relentlessly. Within weeks, it hit the non-fiction bestseller list. By month's end, The Quiet Father was translated into 5 languages. A BBC documentary followed, focusing on Rupert's fall, Evelyn's testimony, and the broader implications of media-driven justice. The project included clips from court, interviews with whistleblowers, and a portion of Margaret's original video. For the first time, Evelyn's story was told without interruption. In the wake of the book's success, Evelyn faced a choice. Her university had reinstated her scholarship and invited her to return. Professors apologized, some sincerely, others formally. She declined. Instead, she registered a new organization, the Truth Archive. Its mission was simple but radical: to provide resources and a platform for individuals whose stories had been silenced, discredited, or buried by systems of power. Not just whistleblowers, but survivors. Witnesses.
Outsider.
She converted the old West Wing of Alden Manor into its first headquarters. What had once been a sealed hallway now pulsed with activity: researchers, writers, advocates, all working to document the untold. Margaret moved into a small cottage near the estate. She and Evelyn shared tea in the garden most mornings, often in silence, occasionally in laughter. There were wounds between them still, but there was also something new: respect. One morning, a letter arrived.
Handwritten, with no return address.
Evelyn opened it carefully. Inside was a brief note.
You think you've won. You haven't.
Some stories should stay buried.
DW.
No threat.
Just menace.
A reminder that the past did not give up quietly. Evelyn showed the letter to Amara, who advised documenting it and moving on. He wants to provoke you, she said. He wants me to stop, Evelyn replied. Which means I won't. She filed the letter into the Truth Archive's first case folder, the Alden Files. The folder was thick now, but not finished. Weeks later, she stood at the University of London, where the university had invited her to speak at a symposium on media ethics and historical truth. Her appearance had sparked controversy, some donors protested, others withdrew. But the event remained scheduled. Evelyn had insisted. When she took the stage, the auditorium was full. Students, professors, activists, critics. The air was taut with expectation. She didn't use slides. She didn't read from notes. She stood at the podium, took a breath, and said, "My father was not a perfect man. He was arrogant, private, sometimes maddening. But he was not a liar. And he was not a thief." She let the words sit. Those labels came from the people who needed him silenced. And for 30 years, it worked. He let the world believe a version of him that wasn't true, because the cost of fighting it was too great. But silence is a currency, and someone always profits from it. She paused, scanning the audience. "I tell you this not because I want your sympathy. I tell you because some of you will one day be the ones who decide whose story gets published. Whose version is believed. Whose voice is dismissed as too angry, too emotional, or too late." She leaned forward. Don't flinch from the truth just because it arrives inconveniently. When she finished, there was no applause at first.
Juste silence.
Then it came, not loud, not frenzied but real. Afterward, a student approached her. "My dad was falsely accused," he said. "We thought no one would ever believe us." Evelyn smiled. "Then tell the story. Even if no one listens at first." That night, in her journal, she wrote,
Dès 44.
"I thought the end would come with a court ruling. But it came with a beginning instead. The story is not mine anymore. It belongs to everyone who has ever been silenced. And they are speaking now."
Summer came slowly to Alden Manor.
The roses along the eastern wall bloomed later than usual, but when they did, they were brilliant, deep crimson and pale cream, clustered in 3s and 5s as if returning deliberately, not by accident. Evelyn walked the grounds every morning now, often barefoot, often alone. The media frenzy had settled into a quieter rhythm. The case review continued in the High Court, but the tone had changed. Witnesses came forward voluntarily. Journalists no longer led with scandal, they led with apology, with reconstruction, with humility. Rupert's name had returned to the public with something Evelyn never thought possible: respect. Some still resisted. Some still whispered. But the volume of the lies had diminished. And in their place stood something firmer. Truth, not yet victorious, but undeniable. On the 40th day after the book's release, Evelyn received a letter, not anonymous, not threatening. This one came with an official crest, the Ministry of Justice. The letter confirmed that the Crown had formally acknowledged substantial inconsistencies and ethical failings in the original handling of the 1993 case. It did not declare Rupert innocent, yet. The review was ongoing. But the tone had shifted from defense to concession.
Evelyn read the letter alone, standing in the study where Rupert used to sit.
She didn't cry. Instead, she took a slow breath and whispered, "I hope you're listening." She folded the letter and placed it inside his journal, right after the unfinished sentence, "Truth needs no applause." That night, she lit a candle and sat by the oak tree where he was buried.
It flickered in the wind, the flame dancing against the soft dusk.
"I didn't fix it all," she said. "But I got them to look." The following week, Evelyn hosted a small gathering at the manor: staff, students, survivors, journalists who had chosen ethics over headlines. They met in the West Wing, which now bore a new plaque above its door, the Evelyn Hart Room, Stories That Speak. Inside were photographs, documents, audio interviews, and handwritten testimonies from people who had once been silenced. It was not a museum. It was a living archive. One wall bore a quote from Rupert's memoir, printed in brass. They will try to rewrite you. Let them try. But leave behind something too true to erase. At the end of the event, a young woman approached Evelyn. She had short hair, nervous hands, and a small notebook clutched to her chest. My name's Nadia, she said. I've been following your case since the first hearing. Evelyn smiled gently. Thank you. I just wanted to say. I came forward about my employer. I was fired.
Blacklisted.
Everyone called me dramatic. But when I watched your testimony, I realized I wasn't alone.
Evelyn placée à Hand onze Gerles-Schulde. Euronaute.
Nadia handed her the notebook. These are my notes. I don't know how to write a story, but maybe someone at your archive can help me tell it. Evelyn nodded. We will. The Truth Archive was now receiving submissions from across the country. Some were minor injustices. Others were seismic. One file contained proof that a housing developer had falsified environmental reports for a decade. Another revealed abuse hidden inside a prestigious boarding school. Each story, big or small, was treated with the same care. Evelyn no longer saw herself as a survivor or a symbol. She saw herself as a bridge, between the past that tried to bury people like her father, and a future where those people could finally stand upright. The final piece came when Evelyn received a private message from a solicitor acting on behalf of Daniel Whitmore. It was a single sentence. My client requests a private meeting. At first, she ignored it. Then she replied. No cameras. No legal teams. Just him. And me. They met in a quiet room at a London hotel. No press. No audience. Daniel arrived on time. Thinner than she remembered.
Palais.
His once impeccable suit now wrinkled at the sleeves. He sat across from her. For a long time, he said nothing. You look like her, he finally said. Evelyn remained still. He continued, she never forgave me. I thought she had. But she didn't. Evelyn didn't blink. She forgave herself. That silenced him. He studied her face, as though searching for a version of himself. He didn't find it. I wanted you to grow up safe, he said. Stable. I told myself that justified everything. You didn't want me safe, Evelyn replied quietly. You wanted her to stay quiet. And I was the price she paid. Daniel looked down. You came here for something, she said. Say it. He swallowed. Public exposure will destroy my career.
Everything he built.
I'm not here to deny what happened. But there are ways to close this quietly.
Without dragging it all through the court.
Evelyn leaned forward, her voice cold and calm.
You silenced a man for 30 years.
You destroyed his name. You manipulated a woman into giving up the man she loved.
And you raised me inali.
He said nothing. You want silence again? She asked. You're decades too late. She stood. There will be no deal.
No key ending. Only the truth.
And she left. Outside, the sun had begun to set behind the London skyline.
Evelyn walked slowly, letting the city noise wrap around her like a song she used to know.
She thought of Rupert. Of Margaret. Of herself. Of all the versions of herself she had outlived. That night, she returned to the manor and opened her journal for the final time. Day 50.
The world isn't key anymore.
Not because it grew louder, but because I did.
The truth cost everything.
But it gave me everything back. Not money. Not power. Just the chance to stand in a room and say, this happened. And I'm still here.
That is enough.
That's everything. She closed the journal, set down her pen, and finally, slept.